Okay, so if you have ever bitten into a gluten-free cake and instantly regretted it, this recipe's for you. I've got an easy tip that changes everything. It makes this gluten-free chocolate cake light and fluffy and moist. And listen to this, people actually choose it over gluten-full cakes voluntarily with regular stuff available. You're gonna wanna see this recipe. Let's do it. So one of my biggest pet peeves with gluten-free recipes is when people take a regular recipe and just swap out gluten-free flour and call it a gluten-free yada, yada, yada. That being said, this recipe takes a regular recipe and swaps out gluten-free flour. But it really works brilliantly for gluten-free flour, and I'm gonna tell you why. And we're gonna do an extra trick at the end that makes it even better. So I've made this so many times. I have all the ingredients on hand all the time. I can whip it up in 5 minutes, so I pretty much have this memorized. It's 2 cups of gluten-free flour, which is 292 grams. I'm using cup for cup gluten-free flour that has cornstarch in it that it'll make the batter a little bit gummier while you're beating it, but then it also gives it a softer texture. But I do know from people writing in that people have used all sorts of flours for this recipe and it works really well. Then I have 2 cups of sugar, which is 400 grams. Now, I know it's a lot of sugar, but it's also a cake. You can reduce the sugar slightly, but you will offset a little bit of the moistness and the structure of the cake. You kind of need that to build up the bulk. And then 3/4 a cup of unsweetened cocoa, which is 75 grams. And then we're gonna finish it off with 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and then 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm just gonna mix that on low speed to combine. All right, for our wet ingredients, 2 large eggs, and then I have 1 cup of milk. Now, this recipe is so easy to make dairy-free because it doesn't have butter in it, so just swap out a non-dairy milk if you need a gluten-free, dairy-free cake. Milk is 245 grams, and then 1/2 cup of oil. I'm just using vegetable oil, which is 107 grams, but you could use any type of oil that floats your boat. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then I am just going to combine that all together again for about a minute until everything's worked in nice and well. All right, here's our secret ingredient, 1 cup of boiling water. Now, this is magic for gluten-free cakes. I'm just gonna slowly pour it in here while it's mixing, but what it's going to do is it softens the gluten-free starches so you never get that like gritty texture. It also does a great job of activating the cocoa in it so you get a nice rich dark cocoa flavor. So just turn it on to low speed and then just slowly pour it in. So once all the boiling water is, and make sure like stand back, or if you have one of those protectors for your bowl, you should put that on so you don't splash yourself. But then turn it up for a minute to beat. Now that's the great thing about gluten-free cakes is you cannot toughen the crumb from over mixing. There's no gluten in it, so nothing's going to get tough. And it actually helps it better. It aerates the batter, and it also works in all that liquid. There's a lot of liquid into this cake, into the gluten-free flour. So go ahead and turn up the speed to medium and then beat 1 more minute. Okay, so this cake bakes in 2 9-inch cake pans. If you go to the recipe, I have other directions too. I've baked this in a 9x13 pan. You could do 8-inch pans. I use this chocolate cake for so many things that I have baked it every which way. Now, if you're doing a layer cake, what I recommend is these food scales are really inexpensive, and I put my baking pan on there and then turn it on to tar it out. And then you know you're getting the same amount of batter in each pan. It just helps make your cake layers even so you don't have wonky layers when you're trying to frost it. All right. Now we have our cake batter. I'm just gonna take them and drop them on the counter just to get out any air bubbles and to kind of flatten the cakes so they bake evenly. All right, we're ready for our last really simple trick to take a gluten-free cake to the next level. Let the batter sit. So since The Cup for Cup has cornstarch in it. I'm going to let it sit for about 10 minutes because it already does a good job of absorbing that extra moisture, which that's why you get like the gumminess in gluten-free baked goods, because gluten-free flour cannot absorb all that moisture. If you're using a different gluten-free flour that doesn't have cornstarch like King Arthur, I would probably let these sit a little bit longer, about 15 minutes before baking. And what it does, it just gives extra time to absorb all that moisture, and then it also sets the structure. So if you've ever pulled a gluten-free cake out of the oven and it looks beautiful, and then it sits and it sinks in the middle, this helps prevent that. So it will build out the structure of the cake. You will hopefully not get like those wrinkly tops on the top. So let them just sit on your counter, room temperature, for about 10 to 15 minutes before baking in a 350 oven for about 30 to 35 minutes. Gluten-free baked goods, I also always err on the side of slightly over baking because they need extra time for that moisture to absorb into it. So you are looking for the top of the cake to be fully set. And then I use a cake tester, which is just a longer skewer to put in there to make sure that there's no wet crumbs on it before pulling it out. Hey, real quick, if you have been stress Googling gluten-free recipes, I made these for you. They are your new kitchen best friend. No gluten-free drama for the whole family. We all just sit down and eat one meal with real, recognizable ingredients you could pick up at your local grocery store. Everything is simple, easy, and totally doable. Life is too short for bad gluten-free food. I have you covered. I have all the links in the description below. Okay, so we are ready to assemble our cake. I have the world's, seriously, I don't say this lightly, the world's best chocolate frosting. It has a secret ingredient in it that makes it over the top delicious. And I will link to this recipe in the description box below. So we're gonna put that on our cake, so kind of like a blackout cake. I have my cake stand, and before I put my first layer on, I just like to rip off sheets of wax paper, and this just protects the bottom of the cake so I can get a little nutty when I frost it and I don't have to worry about cleaning up my cake platter. So I have those, and then I'm gonna just put my first layer on top and just make sure these are pulled out enough that you could easily take them out when you're done frosting. So put a good amount of frosting right on that first layer, and then I have an offset spatula. I love these things for cakes. It just makes smoothing it so much easier, and you could really get the sides with it. Okay, and then I'm gonna just put my other layer on top. Okay, I like to put the frosting on top and then kind of work it down around the sides. And then once you have the sides covered, then I go back onto the top and just make sure everything's really covered. So I'm gonna kind of do a thin layer across the top and work that layer down to the sides. All right, so I know my whole cake is covered, and then the last thing I'm gonna do is just kind of go through and zhuzh it up. So you could do one or two things on the sides. You can, if you want your sides nice and flat, you could go through with the offset spatula and do that. I kind of just like a little bit more grandma just baked this cake for me vibes, so I just kind of do swirls around it, and it really plays off that like soft, fluffy texture of the frosting. And then the last step is you just pull out these wax paper strips, and you have a nice, beautiful, clean cake platter. Ta-da! This cake has been like torturing me for the last hour because I keep smelling it. Oh my God. I mean, there is 0.0 typical gluten-free characteristics of this cake. No one would know that this cake is gluten-free. I get so many rave reviews on this recipe. People that don't even have to eat gluten-free write in and talk about how much they love this cake. It's incredible. I paired it today with the chocolate frosting, but like I said earlier, I've made this every which way. I've made it into a ding-dong cake. I do an ice cream cake. I have an Andes mint pudding poke cake that I do with this. I've made cupcakes. I mean, I have so many recipes that are based off this basic chocolate cake recipe. Incredible. I will link to some of those below, but you could also check out my website, Mamagourmand, where I have a ton of cake ideas. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.